There is a moment that passes between two people, so subtle, so easily overlooked, that it almost disappears into the noise of everyday life. And yet that moment holds more power than words, more meaning than vows, more transformation than time itself. It's the moment when a man doesn't simply notice a woman, but experiences something in her that shakes the framework of who he thought he was. And strangely, she often has no idea it happened. She was just being, just existing. Perhaps lost in her thoughts, perhaps laughing at something silly, perhaps looking at the world as if she knew a secret no one else could see. And in that moment, something ancient in him stirs. Not desire, not lust, not even love, as the world understands it, but a recognition soul deep that this woman represents something he has never met before in the outer world, but has long searched for within. And what Carl Jung taught us is that these encounters are never random. They are psychic, archetypal, unconscious. Because a man doesn't fall in love with what he understands. He falls in love with what he doesn't. He is drawn not to certainty, but to mystery. Not to comfort, but to disruption. What compels him, what renders him sleepless and stirred, isn't the obvious. It's the symbolic, the mythological, the way she awakens in him the presence of his own forgotten soul. And this is what most women don't realize, that when a man falls deeply, irrationally, permanently in love, it is not with the woman as she appears, but with what she awakens. He is not chasing her body, nor even her mind, but the image she reflects from the depths of his own unconscious. She becomes a mirror, a living portal, an embodiment of the anima, the feminine energy that Jung believed lives dormant in every man waiting aching to be discovered. And when a woman walks in who unconsciously mirrors this energy, something divine happens, something terrifying, something irreversible. She doesn't have to try. In fact, it's precisely when she isn't trying that it happens. When she is unguarded, unapologetic, entirely herself. When she is unknowingly whole. That's when the projection is cast. That's when the archetype activates. That's when his soul begins to burn with questions he never dared to ask. Who am I beneath the mask? What part of me has been asleep? Why does she haunt me without speaking? The truth is he's not obsessed with her. Not really. He's obsessed with the version of himself she silently evokes. The self he could become if he were brave enough to integrate her energy within. And that's the paradox. Because to get close to her, he'd have to confront everything in himself he's avoided. His softness, his longing, his tenderness, his truth. She doesn't complete him. She exposes his incompletion. And while part of him is drawn to that, another part is terrified. Because falling in love with this kind of woman means letting go of control. It means surrendering to transformation. And transformation is not romantic. It's a death of the old identity, of the old defenses, of the old illusions. She becomes the spark that sets the internal fire ablaze. And for the first time, he sees himself not as the world sees him, not as he pretends to be, but as he truly is beneath the armor. That is why he can't forget her. Why he dreams of her years later. Why her silence speaks louder than another woman's affection. Because she wasn't just a person. She was a symbol, a disruption, a chance. She showed him something he didn't know he needed. Not her, but him. And most women never realize this. They think he forgot, that he moved on, that their time together was a footnote. But no. For a man whose soul was truly touched, she became scripture. She became myth. She became the one story he keeps telling himself, hoping to one day understand what it really meant. not because he wants to relive it, but because he wants to become worthy of it. The tragedy is many men never do. They bury the memory instead of learning from it. They chase versions of her in different faces, hoping to find again what they lost. But they don't realize it was never about her. It was about the version of himself he glimpsed through her. That's what he's truly searching for. And that is why the most unforgettable women are not always the most beautiful, the most giving, or the most available. They are the most symbolic, the most aligned with their essence, the most unapologetically whole, not perfect, not flawless, whole. And in that wholeness, they reflect a man's inner split. They awaken not his ego, but his soul, not his desires, but his destiny. So if you are a woman who has ever been left wondering why he came close, only to pull away, why he adored you, only to vanish, understand this. He wasn't running from you. He was running from the part of himself you awakened. He wasn't rejecting you. He was rejecting the internal earthquake you caused. Because the heart, when cracked open too quickly, doesn't always know how to stay open. Sometimes it shuts down in panic. Sometimes it runs in confusion. Sometimes it convinces itself it was all a dream. But the soul remembers, and the soul keeps calling, long after the body walks away, long after the mind tries to forget, long after the ego builds walls. The soul keeps whispering what she awakened was real, what she showed you was possible. Don't run from it. Become it. And that is the invitation, not to return to her, but to return to yourself. Because the love that truly transforms doesn't come to complete us. It comes to break us, so we can become whole on our own. She was never the destination. She was the door, and it is up to the man to walk through it. Or not. But once he's seen it, he will never be the same. A man who has glimpsed the divine through a woman does not walk away untouched. Even if he appears unmoved, even if he builds another life with another face, there is a quiet thread still binding him to that encounter. Not because he still loves her in the conventional sense, but because she unveiled to him the very thing he had buried his essence. Carl Jung understood that the human psyche is not built on surface experiences, but on archetypal awakenings. And when a woman reflects to a man his anima, the hidden feminine within him, long suppressed by culture and pride, she doesn't just inspire affection, she destabilizes everything. She reveals the internal war. The persona he has worn his whole life, strong, unaffected, independent, begins to crumble. And while he may resist the collapse, something in him knows it is necessary. He may call it heartbreak. He may call it confusion. But it is initiation. The ancient rite of losing the false self. Because love, real love, doesn't come to comfort. It comes to evolve. And evolution demands death. Not of the body, but of illusion, of roles, of control, of the stories he's told himself about what it means to be a man. That is why he cannot truly possess a woman who awakens him. He may try, he may chase, he may fall into obsession, but what he seeks is not dominance, it is understanding. Because she activated the part of him he did not yet know how to hold. And as long as he tries to own her, he fails to meet himself. Jung warned us of this danger of mistaking the projection for the person. And when the man refuses to take back his projection, he turns her into a ghost, a fantasy, a dream. He wants her to continue playing the role of his unconscious guide rather than becoming conscious himself. But the wise woman never stays in that space. She doesn't remain a muse. She walks away. not in bitterness, but in self-respect. She understands what she was: a reflection, a signpost, a call, not a home. Because to stay would be to betray herself, to freeze in a role meant only to catalyze. And so she leaves. Not loudly, not cruelly, but clearly. And in that silence, something in him finally begins to stir. At first, it feels like abandonment, but soon it feels like truth. And truth, when it strikes the unconscious, shakes the very roots of identity. This is when the man begins to question. Why her? Why now? Why does it feel like something sacred slipped through his fingers? And the answer, though difficult, is this. She wasn't meant to stay. She was meant to open a door. And now, alone in the quiet, he must choose whether to walk through it. The choice is not about getting her back. It's about becoming the version of himself that she mirrored. The one who no longer hides behind bravado. The one who doesn't need to dominate to feel powerful. The one who feels without fear. Who receives without control. Who surrenders without losing himself. This is the path of individuation, Jung's ultimate vision of psychological wholeness. And for most men, it begins not with victory, but with heartbreak. Not with possession, but with loss. The loss of the woman who never tried to be loved, and because of that, became unforgettable. The loss of the mirror that dared to show him his soul. And what makes it more piercing is this: she likely never knew the magnitude of what she was. She never performed, never postured, never manipulated. She simply lived in alignment with herself. And that is what made her revolutionary. That is what shattered his defense mechanisms. Because in a world of performative love, she loved from her center, or not at all. She did not bend to please. She did not contort to fit. She stood in her truth and allowed herself to be seen. And in that vulnerability, she became power incarnate. Not the kind that seeks followers or attention, but the kind that changes lives without trying. That is the feminine at its most sacred, not submissive, not seductive, but sovereign. She does not pursue. She allows. She does not chase. She attracts. Not through tactics, but through being. And when a man encounters such energy, he must either rise to meet it or retreat in fear. But either way, he is never the same. The world has told men to chase beauty, comfort, admiration. But the soul chases truth. And truth does not always smile. It breaks. It pierces. It burns. That is why he remembers her. Not because she gave him pleasure, but because she gave him pain, the kind of pain that wakes the dead. The kind of pain that shatters illusions. The kind of pain that calls a man back to his essence. So if you are a woman who has ever been haunted by the silence of a man who once seemed spellbound, do not doubt your impact. His silence is not always forgetfulness. Often, it is reverence, confusion, a slow unfolding of what you stirred in him. And if he never comes back, understand you did not fail. You fulfilled your role. You were the symbol he needed, the catalyst he wasn't ready for. And if he does come back, it won't be to possess. It will be to thank you, not with words, but with presence, with truth, with the quiet strength of a man who finally chose to see himself. That is love, not need, not control, but recognition. And it begins not with knowing the other, but with knowing oneself. This is the hidden truth behind why men fall deeply, suddenly, irreversibly in love, not with the woman herself, but with what she awakens that he has long buried in shadow. He doesn't want her. He wants to be whole. And she unknowingly gave him a glimpse of how that might feel. What makes her unforgettable is not what she says or does, but the way her energy lingers long after she's gone. She was never chasing validation, never trying to be adored, and perhaps that's why he couldn't look away. In a world where most relationships are built on compromise and performance, she was something entirely different, undistorted. She moved not to impress, but to express. She loved not to win someone over, but to remain in alignment with herself. And this, though rarely spoken, is the deepest source of a man's attraction. Carl Jung spoke of the unconscious as the wellspring of all meaning. And in a man's unconscious lies not a checklist of traits he seeks in a partner, but a symbolic image, ancient, primal, emotional, that carries everything he's ever longed for, yet never articulated. This image isn't a woman. It is the anima, the feminine soul within him, yearning to be known. And when he meets a woman who reflects this inner image, even if imperfectly, he doesn't just like her. He is seized by something, compelled, moved, torn open. But this is not the Hollywood version of love. It is not romance, it is revelation. She does not complete him, she disrupts him. She introduces him to everything he's repressed, everything he's feared. She doesn't simply make him feel alive, she makes him feel exposed. This is why the experience is as frightening as it is magnetic. Because to stay with her would mean to face himself, to break open old wounds, to step into a version of himself he doesn't yet know how to hold. So he retreats. Not because she is too much, but because she is too true. Her presence doesn't let him pretend. She sees him not the mask, but the man. And the gaze of a conscious woman is one of the most terrifying forces a man can encounter, especially if he has built his life avoiding the truth of who he really is. And yet, even in his retreat, he is haunted, not by her body, not by her affection, but by the inner world she awoke. And here is where most women misunderstand. They think he moved on, that he forgot, that it meant nothing. But the soul keeps score in symbols, not timelines. And the woman who awakened his symbolic center will never be replaced. She becomes a landmark in his unconscious, a reference point for what love could be, not soft, not easy, not tame, but sacred, transformative, wild, and real. Sometimes he spends years chasing substitutes, unaware that what he seeks is not another woman, but the man he glimpsed when he was with her, the man he could have become. That is the heartbreak, not her departure, but his own delay in rising to meet what she saw in him. And this again is the tragedy Jung warned of. When projection is not withdrawn, it becomes obsession. He cannot let go, not because he still loves her, but because he cannot return to the self he was before her. She has fractured the old paradigm. And now, he must either evolve or remain in psychic exile. That's why years later, in the quiet hours, when the noise has settled and the distractions have worn thin, she returns. Not her, but the feeling, the memory, the meaning, the way she made him see, the way her absence taught him more than any presence ever could. He recalls the way she walked away, not with anger, but with peace. And he realizes she didn't leave to punish him. She left to protect her truth. And in doing so, she offered him the greatest gift, the space to meet his own. But he didn't know it then. He may not even know it now. Because to understand her fully would require that he become her equal. Not in gender, but in soul, in depth, in awareness, in capacity for truth. And so he wrestles with it, sometimes alone, sometimes beside another woman who feels less like a mirror and more like a refuge from the storm. But the soul never forgets. It knows when it has been touched by the real. And this knowing cannot be undone. That is the secret power of the woman who doesn't perform. She becomes real, And the real is unforgettable. Not because it is flawless, but because it is rare. She didn't show him a fantasy. She showed him himself. And that is a gift very few women give, not because they aren't capable, but because they've been taught to hide, to please, to shrink. But she dared to be whole, and in doing so, she became holy, a symbol of the eternal feminine, the call to inner union, the sacred invitation to come home. And this Jung understood deeply that until a man integrates his feminine, he will search for her endlessly outside himself, always falling in love, always falling short, never quite arriving. But when he meets her, the woman who embodies the echo of his own soul, the search becomes unbearable, because he can no longer pretend that what he seeks is out there. He knows now it is in here, within. And that knowledge is both a curse and a calling. A curse because it ruins the comfort of illusion. A calling because it begins the true journey, the path to wholeness. And that path begins always not with desire, but with loss. With the loss of her and the discovery of him. And in that discovery, painful, slow, relentless, the man begins to peel away the layers he never questioned before. His ideals of love, shaped by childhood wounds and inherited myths, begin to shatter. He starts to see that much of what he called love was dependency. Much of what he believed was masculinity was suppression. And the woman who once appeared as a mystery begins to make sense not as a puzzle to be solved, but as a reflection of everything he hadn't yet integrated. This is what Jung meant when he said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Her departure becomes his awakening. Her distance becomes his mirror. The silence she left behind becomes a room where he finally hears his soul speak. He doesn't just miss her. He misses who he could have been in her presence. He misses the way she called out his depth. And slowly, the questions shift from why did she leave to why was I not ready? That question is the beginning of transformation. Not guilt, not shame, but responsibility. The first time he saw her, something cracked, and he thought it was attraction. But it was recognition. The recognition of a part of himself that had no voice until then. She didn't speak it. She embodied it. She carried the essence of a forgotten truth. And truth doesn't negotiate. It doesn't beg to be understood. It simply waits. And sometimes it waits a lifetime. Most men, when confronted with this kind of love, retreat into repetition. They date safer women, quieter reflections, faces that don't challenge, souls that don't speak too loudly. And they tell themselves they're happy. But late at night, when the persona falls off and the room is silent, they remember her not because she was perfect, but because she was real. Because she didn't try to be loved. Because she loved herself more than she needed to be chosen. And in that self-love, she showed him the possibility of loving without losing oneself. That is the greatest lesson a woman can offer a man, that love does not have to cost your identity. That intimacy does not require sacrifice of soul. But this lesson can only be learned when she leaves. Because while she stays, he projects, he imagines, he clings, he demands. And she in her wisdom knows that true love is not sustained by performance. It is born in presence and preserved in authenticity. So she steps away. And the world sees her as cold, detached, unforgiving. But she knows. She knows that staying would mean silencing her truth. And so she walks, not because she wants to, but because her soul demands it. And the man left, in the echo of her footsteps, is left with a choice to numb or to awaken. Most numb at first. They distract, they deflect, they dive into success or pleasure or noise. But the seed has been planted, and no matter how far they run, that seed will grow. Slowly, quietly, until one day something cracks again, and this time it's from within. A memory, a scent, a sentence, a dream, and suddenly he's back in that moment, back in her presence, back in the version of himself that felt both terrified and alive. That is the moment the journey inward begins, and no one around him understands. His friends tell him to move on. His mind tells him it's over, but his soul is on fire. Not because she left, but because she woke him. And now he cannot go back to sleep. He begins to read books he once laughed at. He starts to sit in silence longer than he's comfortable with. He stops seeking quick answers and starts sitting with long questions. He may even find her again, but not to possess her, to thank her, or perhaps to simply look her in the eyes and let her know I remember. Not the details, not the dates, but the shift, the mirror. The moment I realized who I wasn't. That's what she was, not the final chapter, but the catalyst, the first page of the real story. And though it took him years, he now understands. She didn't leave because he was unworthy. She left because her soul recognized that he wasn't ready. And readiness, in Jungian terms, is not about maturity or age or knowledge. It's about willingness, the willingness to suffer, to let go, to be reborn. And at the time, he wasn't. But now, as he stands amidst the rubble of his former identity, he sees it clearly. Her love was never the kind that wrapped him in comfort. It was the kind that burned down his illusions. And though it hurt, he is grateful. Because now, every woman he meets from truth. He no longer chases mothers and lovers. He no longer performs to be seen. He no longer fears the depth. He seeks it. He no longer needs her back, because what she gave him was not her body, her time, or her affection. It was the beginning of himself. And that gift, though veiled in heartbreak, is sacred. It cannot be returned. It can only be honored by becoming, by integrating, by loving without masks, by standing in wholeness. And in this new space, he no longer asks, why did she leave? He whispers, thank you. Thank you for not staying. Thank you for being real. Thank you for becoming the voice of my unconscious when I had none. And the greatest irony is this: she may never know. She may never hear those words. She may have closed that chapter long ago. But the soul remembers. And in the silence of his own healing, he carries her forward not as a wound, but as a light. Not as a loss, but as a lesson. Not as the one that got away, but as the one who set me free. The final transformation begins when he no longer sees her as the destination, but as the doorway. Because that's what she always was, a threshold between his unconscious and the man he was meant to become. She didn't arrive to complete him, nor to validate him, but to crack him open in places he didn't know were closed. And in those fractures, light entered. Light that didn't soothe immediately, but exposed. Light that didn't heal, but revealed. And for a man who has lived his entire life under the mask of control, that kind of exposure feels like annihilation. But as Carl Jung taught, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And she was the figure who walked into his life bearing that mirror. She didn't pretend to save him. She never promised permanence. She just stood, unwavering in her essence, and that was enough to unravel the lies he had lived by. The lie that love must be earned. That vulnerability is weakness. That silence is rejection. That wholeness is external. She refuted all of it, not with arguments, but with embodiment. In her presence, he couldn't lie to himself anymore. He saw the boy, still aching to be seen, the man who had confused dominance with power, the wounded heart still writing stories from old pain. And though he resisted, though he tried to label her as too much, too intense, too mysterious, deep down, he knew she was truth. Not a comfortable one, not a convenient one, but the kind of truth that demands evolution. And that's why, even years later, when her name is no longer spoken, her effect remains. He hears her in the quiet moments, when life feels hollow. He sees her in the eyes of women who don't quite reach the depth she stirred. He feels her in his spine when someone speaks with false intimacy. Not because she is still with him, but because she awakened a part of him that will never sleep again. She made love synonymous with awakening, and that can never be undone. It doesn't matter who came after her. No one else was her. Not because of what she looked like, but because of what she called forth. She didn't touch his surface. She touched his soul. And the soul once touched marks time differently. It doesn't care about calendars or logic or social rules. It remembers essence. It remembers who you were before the world told you who to be. And that's what she brought him back to. The original self, the unguarded self, the self before the world trained him to withhold, to calculate, to conquer. And in that remembrance, he finds pain. But beneath the pain, he finds truth. And beneath the truth, he finds freedom. Because he no longer needs to perform. He no longer needs to chase the external. He begins to root into his own being. And from that root, everything changes. He speaks differently. He listens differently. He loves differently. Not to possess, not to rescue, but to witness, to honor, to co-create. Because now he understands the love that truly changes. A man does not beg for attention. It demands reflection. It is not loud. It is not desperate. It is silent, dignified, and sovereign, just like she was. And in that understanding, he lets her go, not out of anger, not out of pain, but out of reverence. He no longer clings to the memory. He integrates it. He no longer idolizes her. He becomes the man she mirrored, not to win her back, but because he finally sees what she saw. And this is the point Jung made over and over, that true love is not about finding someone to complete your brokenness. It is about finding the courage to face the self that is buried beneath the roles, the fears, the conditioning. She was not the one. She was the symbol, the awakening, the beginning of a deeper love story, not between man and woman, but between a man and his own soul. And now, having walked through that fire, he can love from a place of fullness. He no longer needs her to carry the projection. He has taken it back. He has made the unconscious conscious. He has become. So if you are a woman who has ever been left wondering why he changed after you, why he couldn't stay, even though the connection was real, know this: you were never forgotten. You were never invisible. You were never just another chapter. You were the mirror, the myth, the first truth. You were the call that pulled him inward. And even if he never returns to speak it, you remain etched in the architecture of his becoming. You were the first time he saw himself. And you, man, who has walked this road, if you've lost her and found yourself in the process, know that the journey was not in vain. The pain had a purpose. The silence was sacred. You were not broken. You were broken open. And from this opening, you have emerged not as someone who loves better, but as someone who loves truer. The woman who woke you will always be part of your story, not because you need her, but because she was the one who dared to reflect what you were meant to become. And that reflection was the beginning of everything.